Welcome to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. This is another special interview episode, and we have a very special guest today. Anybody who was playing games in the early 80s, either on the Apple II and later on the Commodore 64, will know the name Muse Software. Obviously, the biggest legacy they had that can still be found on the shelves today is the massive Wolfenstein franchise, but there's so much more to this company. And we are very, very happy today to have the founder of Muse Software, Ed Zaron, with us, and he's going to regale us with his tales of a company that really revolutionized and set many of the standards for the industry as we know it today. Welcome to the show, Ed Zaron.
Well, thank you. Nice to be here.
Glad to have you. So let's go back. There's obviously tons to talk about Muse itself, but let's find out what was going on before Muse. How does Ed Zaron get into computers? What's your first contact?
Wow. My first contact would be on the IBM 1401 when I was in the service back in 65. That's 1965, obviously.
Wow.
I just was so attracted to computers. They were like, just something I could imagine about. And I took a course on computers, and what was available at the time was IBM 1401, which you programmed in a language called autocoder. And I was kind of an aggressive guy with computers. I thought they were really going to be the future. And I had great feelings about how the problems with computers in the future were going to be with the human interface, and how the most important thing was that interface with the computer. And the people that were teaching me the IBM 1401 weren't really up to speed. And so we had a few conflicts there. And when I was the number one in the class because I just slept and dreamt this stuff, they wouldn't give me the recognition for that. And although I aced every possible test and practical thing, he wouldn't give me a certificate that said I was number one in the class. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, that would be unfair to the other students. But I was just politically not correct, because there was one practical we did where we had to sort some cards or something. And I remember it still. And the cards came out, they pumped out the side, the ones that had errors. And I went to great trouble in my program to have a printout that said what was wrong with every card, so that the human using the system could know how to fix it. And they got upset. They said, well, that's overkill. They just tell them that the cards are faulty, or something.
Oh,
but anyhow,
wow.
So but the point of that little story is that the most important thing with the computer is its interface with the user, and that it be usable. And throughout the rest of my career, I would constantly see instances when the programmer that was working with me or for me in different environments would say, well, the computer can't do that. And I would have to reinforce again that the purpose is to make it easy for the user. But anyhow, enough of that preaching, because now that's a reality. But go ahead. So how did I start? So I did that first. Then I got out of the service and I got a job in a finance company, commercial credit, in downtown Baltimore. And I first worked on the operating system there, which was all assembly language stuff. And I was pretty good with computers and also with this human interface stuff, and quick to learn. So I got a really cherry project, which was modeling the entire company, which was like 20 different subsidiaries at the time. And that was great fun. And through that, I got a lot of business knowledge. I remember I had meetings with executives and I knew nothing about, what a profit and loss statement looked like or anything. And so they just threw a couple business books at me and said, here, go read this stuff, But finally it turned out well, and we did a model of the whole company that they could use for their 5-year planning. And that was one of the first times I think that had been done, or at least it was in the early days of doing it. And next, after that, the next programming thing I moved on to, and at that time I was in an operations research group. The next thing I did after that was a personal accomplishment is that I created what I believe is the first numerical credit scoring system.
Really?
And I did it using discriminant analysis and all kinds of statistics and the computers that were available at the time, and implemented across their like 1,000 or so loan offices around the country a numerical credit scoring system, which got great resistance from people in the loan offices. The managers of the loan offices used to say, well, if the guy's profession starts with a P, like plumber, painter, or something, you can't give him a loan. And that's how we do it, Ed. So it was a hard sell to them that they were just going to score these people, and and that was going to determine whether or not they got the loan. So that was interesting. Now, at the end of that project, as I was implementing that, I bought an Apple II.
So what year are we talking about at this point?
Well, I think I would put that right in like January of 78 or maybe December of 77.
Okay.
So I took that Apple II home, and I don't know, Apple had for documentation, they had the Red Book, which was a book formatted. It was like the same size as the current Road and Track, slightly over magazine size. And it was about an inch thick. I think it was about 100 pages, if I remember right. And that was the documentation for the whole Apple II world. That was it. You had 100 pages to go by. And remember, at this time, there was no email. There was no, maybe there was email. No, I don't think there was. Well, you would know better when email started.
Certainly. Email over the internet doesn't come until obviously the government opens up the internet, but you do have email-based services starting in the early Micronet opens up in 79. So in 79 you would have had email.
There you go. So, a bunch of little isolated nodes of development around the country. And so just the early development, if you want to hear a little bit more about how I started on the first programs. Okay. So I can remember having that book and trying to get the instruction set to work. And you have to remember now that there were no tools, there were no assemblers. You had to hand assemble the stuff in assembly language and like type it into the memory locations, which meant that if you had like an error somewhere in the code and you had to make a patch, you had to take out some instructions there and put a jump to somewhere in free memory, write some more instructions to fix it, and then jump back to there. So there was no assembly, no relocation of code, none of that kind of stuff. And when I first started, I didn't have a printer either. And I can remember this room I worked in a row home in downtown Baltimore, where I had pieces of paper, regular notebook paper, taped to the wall in front of me, because I had to copy all the instructions off the screen and put it up there so I would know what was going on. There was no hard copy. Later on, I got an old dot matrix printer that I salvaged from work because I was still employed at commercial credit as I started the company. So the first thing I worked on was a program called Tank War, Tank War. Remember
Ed, one second before we get into that. So when you originally bought the Apple II, was it with the intention of starting a software company, or was that just for your own personal use at first?
Oh, no, it's just for my own personal use because I love to, lose myself in the computer. Yeah. And still do. And one of the long-term weaknesses of my computer businesses has been and continues to be, like you saw that mdiware.com, and this is the last time I'll mention it. I don't want to overload you with it, but it's a great piece of software for moving to the cloud, but I can't market it because that's not my interest. I don't want to do that. I want to. I'm on like the next step of software past that, you know. And the
I hear
same
you.
thing with the other thing we talked about, the wake up smarter, you know.
Oh, and just
So yeah,
for our listeners' sake, they didn't hear that part of our conversation because that was before the intro. Those are other products that you've created in the last few years, correct?
correct,
Yes.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
the MDIware.com is something I did just in the last 2 years. It's a product to ease the movement of desktop applications to the cloud and gives you, an MDI interface. But
okay.
anyhow, so returning back when I bought that Apple II, no, I bought it just to play with it, and to see what I could do, and that means writing programs. And the first program I wrote was a program called Tank War, and the difficulty was that as soon as I got that program done and showed it to the guy at the local computer store, uh, because I had been in touch with him, as I started to learn about the Apple, he was somehow knowledgeable, more than just the Red Book 100 pages about the inside of this machine. So I had to contact him once in a while. When he saw that program, he was really excited and said, "Hey, sell me one. Can I get that from my customers? How can I get that?" So I immediately then was drawn off my programming course to start making, what they have at the time. They had CDs. Yeah, they had these little tapes. And I can remember many a night sitting up all night making the tapes directly out of the Apple II. It had a little plug in the back, and you had a tape recorder plugged in, and you would record to that. And one night at least, I remember this clearly, as I spent a couple hours recording onto this tape recorder, starting the save in the Apple and starting the tape recorder, synchronizing it. And then I realized it had been unplugged for like the last 2 hours. So all those tapes
oh,
were, nothing. Yeah.
oh my
So
goodness.
it was pretty crazy. And when I think about it now, what I feel is just the sense of exhaustion. It was always exhaustion in those early days after I started working on that first program, because I had more programs to do and I also had to run a business. So let me take a break here and ask another question to keep me on track.
Of course. Okay, so you are selling them to your local Apple dealer. He is basically your first point of distribution. How long does it take before you start actively searching for other retail outlets, or are they coming to you? How do you get the word out about your software?
Good question. I think initially I must have put a small ad in somewhere, and I don't remember where, because I started getting orders coming to a post office box I had in downtown Baltimore. And I remember one day walking over there with a fellow a friend from Commercial Credit to pick up the orders. And he said to me, "Ed, one day you're not going to have to do this. You're going to have somebody picking up the orders for you." And I said, "Oh, come on, I'm not going to do that. I'm just doing this for fun." But as we know, it got larger as time went on. So I must have had an ad somewhere, but also I did small computer shows. I can remember the first computer show, and computer shows at that time were typically a Saturday event in a high school gymnasium where a local computer club would get together. And so my son and I, and he was, I guess, 9 at the time, my son and I went to a few of those shows, and we would have a card table and an extension cord and the Apple, and we would sell our software there. So that was the early start, and I don't know it's hard for me to remember what the next bump up was, but I remember there was a major problem with making the tapes, and I had to go finally to a recording studio with the guy who had some high tech equipment. Excuse me, and he would take my master and make copies of it. But sometime before that, I started to I was still making the tapes manually, and that is, with the tape recorder plugged in. And I took the box that the tapes came in, and I remember the cassette tapes, the blank cassette tapes came in a box of 10. And, so it was like 4 inches deep and 4 inches high and, 8 inches wide. And I went to the printer and I made little glue on labels for the sides of the box and for the top. And then I took that to the computer store with 10 programs in it. And I may have had another program at that time. I may have had my second program, which was the Maze program written by Silas Warner, who is a story unto himself. Silas has passed now, but
Yeah.
he was just the most wonderful person. And I could talk for 2 hours just about Silas and ask me some stories about
Oh,
Silas as
believe me, Mr. Warner is on my note list. There's no way I'm letting you go without talking about him.
good.
But so at this point, how early does the name Muse Software show up?
So I was trying to think of a name for the company, and it was pretty early. It was after the time. Oh, so I'm going to have to jump to a Silas story because this is chronologically true.
Okay.
So about somehow he discovered me at the company. He and I weren't associates at Commercial Credit, but he worked there. But somehow he heard through the grapevine, the company grapevine, that I had bought an Apple. So I'm at home on a Friday night, and this big fellow comes to my door. And Silas was, 6'6" or 6'8", something that magnitude, really big.
Mm.
Big, square-shouldered, big, strong-looking guy. And he comes to my door and he goes, "Hi, I'm Silas Warner. I heard you bought an Apple." And I said, "Yeah, I bought an Apple." And I was getting ready to go out for the evening. And he said, "Well, can I come in and see it?" And I said, "Well, yeah, take a look at it." So he came in and he took a look at it, put his hands on it, pressed the keys a little. And I said, "Well, Silas, I've got to go. I'm going out for the evening." And he said, "That's okay. I'll lock the door." And so that was how I met Silas. And
Wow.
from then on, he and I were like bosom buddies for many years.
Wow.
So I was, I felt the pressure to start a company. And so I thought I picked up the name Muse from somewhere, just for its dictionary meaning. And I was talking to Silas about it. And I said, "Silas, I'm thinking about calling it Muse, or I don't know what." And he said, "Oh yeah, call it Muse. That can stand for Micro User Software Exchange." And I said, "Well, what did that just come off the top of your head?" So that was what I called it. And Silas and I were almost partners in the company. Um, but we had some little spats and decided not to be partners, that we would be close working associates, that he would work for me. But he was, emotionally and everything, we were partners, but
Gotcha.
business wise, we weren't. So now where does that leave me? We got
You got a
what
name for
was
the
what was that?
company.
Oh
You
yeah,
got a
we
name
got
for the
the name.
company. You've got Silas Warner, and so now just from a business standpoint, and because the creativity is definitely something that we've already established with you making games and programs and so forth, but is at this point where Silas is the one who gives the inspiration for what the company name should mean and what actually gets put into the documents. I looked up the original
Correct.
a firm name, and that's why I also wanted to ask. Software exchange was something that, for example, Softside magazine had a software exchange and so forth. So I wasn't sure if that was just something you guys had picked up, or if there was a different business model originally intended other than products you produced yourselves.
Well, you're absolutely correct. As we started there was also a Programma, if you remember Dave Gordon from Programma.
Yes.
Uh, and the software exchange was the thing. We thought at the beginning, well, we'll be a software exchange. we'll take find programs and we'll publish them, and we'll either keep a small piece or we'll pay royalties or whatever. So we had a feeling that was going to be the direction. And later on, as the company progressed, we were pulled in that direction of using outsiders' software, polishing it a little, and publishing it. And some of the outsiders did really good work. We had a fellow, Richard Orban, who was an independent, published through us, and he did 3 Mile Island, which was a great program. Modeling the collapse of the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor, and did some race car stuff too. But in general, the idea that we were going to get quality programs from outside was not a working thing. We wasted a lot of time and resources trying to shape up other people's programs, whereas we could have just written them better ourselves and spent the resources to have a staff to do it. But as a businessman, I was never really there, and just didn't have. Although I had operations research and statistical ideas, as far as knowing where the business was going to go, I would have to say I was overwhelmed by it from the first time they wanted copies of my programs, because I just wanted to have my head in the computer because I had more great ideas, So it was all, I didn't have the patience to think about it. And I've reflected on it a number of times because, we went out of business in 81 when the recession hit us. And also we had a number of internal problems. The guy that was our marketing man got very sick and was dysfunctional then. But anyhow, so getting back to the story, we thought that yes, we could do it as a publishing company and get outside people to come in, and it would be a software exchange kind of thing. But that next takes us to when we went from the cassette boxes with the paste on sides. Shortly around that time, I think it was November of '78. I had to leave commercial credit to do this full time, and I got a small office and a friend's wife to be my assistant, and then we started the business full time. I believe that was in November.
Okay.
And we came out with a number of programs. We had Tank War, we had Maze, we had another thing called the Music Box, which was a program that played music on the Apple. We also had a program called The Voice that allowed you to record from the tape in. You could put a speaker into a microphone into that, and we developed software that allowed you to record either separate words or separate syllables and then play them back as sentences or words, however you wanted to use it.
Oh, wow.
And it was a program called The Voice, and it was really hot stuff at the time. I believe it was the first thing to do that. And from that, now, so Silas came over one day, and he said he wasn't working for the company yet. He was just an independent guy. And he came in and he said, "Ed, I have this great idea. I saw a arcade game, and I believe the arcade game was called Berserk."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he said, I could take and use that kind of format of running from rooms to rooms and have it be Germans. And he was like all excited about it. And I said, sure. And I said, why don't you do this? Why don't you take the voice and put that into it? Then it'll be an action game with voice too. So, together we worked on the design of that. And I think he did all the programming in that first version. But we were every day looking at that together, and here's where we are so far and stuff. Yeah, and that progressed along. But at that point, I believe we had made the transition at that time to newer packaging. So we've skipped a whole thing that may be of interest to you
Definitely.
about the packaging and the production of those cassette tapes.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
as I said, we we were making the tapes by hand at first, and we just couldn't get the quality we needed. So we went to a recording studio and spent some hours there, and he got it to where he could make reliable copies. And at that point, we were at ordering 100 or maybe more, a whole tray full of cassettes, we would get at a time. And I had an artist friend, Jim, I can't remember his last name, but I said, here, do me individual arts for these packages, and I'll give you a quarter a copy royalty on the cassettes as we sell them. So he liked that, and it turned out to be good for him too. Enough 25-cent pieces adds
Yeah.
up for you. So we did that, and then we needed something to put the cassettes in, and we made like a real heavy vinyl clear plastic bag that could hang on a rack. And inside there, behind the cassette, we put in a piece of cardboard that was printed really bright. And I remember doing the design on that. We called it super load cassettes because one of the problems at the time was everybody was having trouble loading their cassette tapes because of the mixed quality of them. So we decided to call them super load. And I think that went over big at the time. And the colors of the design were just the primary colors. I instructed the artist, I said, do it like Disney would do it. You want to use Disney colors and simple design, big and open. So that came out pretty good. And I'm kind of proud of that design, in the sense that, sometimes you're more proud of the more involvement you have in something.
Oh,
And so
definitely.
I've got some of those out in the barn still in the farm here.
Oh, really? Now
Oh
those
yeah,
are collector pieces.
I bet they are. I bet they are. Yeah. So that progressed. Then cassettes transitioned to floppy disks, and at the same time, we transitioned to getting a disk-based assembly programs, so we didn't have to do the stuff by hand. The business progressed in the background with that. We had our little office still of, I think we got a third person in the office to do packing and shipping. And my friend's wife, Maggie, was still running the office and stuff, and I was doing the programming. And Silas would come in evenings and show me where he was on stuff. So where does that take us? That
So
takes us to the release of Castle Wolfenstein, making a box for that.
was that the
We
first
made,
game that you released in a box?
yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah, yeah, I believe it was. Yeah,
So so that would have
yeah,
been
hard
81,
box.
80 or 81 is Castle Wolfenstein.
No, I think maybe it was even 79. I mean, we went out of business in 81, so it was a short rise and quick fall there when all those things coincide. You can hear my voice talking about the fall.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so let me see what else is of interest there. I don't know.
Well,
Better ask me a question and direct me.
okay. So you're selling these games. I'm guessing most of them you're designing or Silas is designing in-house. With, like you said, a few things coming in from the outside, and Silas sees Berserk and you two start developing Castle Wolfenstein. Now, when that comes out on the Apple, and you just said it's first game that comes in an actual box. Uh, w- were you watching what other companies were doing at this time in the market? Were you getting any kind of feedback either from retailers or from users as to what they were looking for in either the content or the presentation of the product? And how did the shift from cassette to disc influence the way you guys went about both the business and the design side? And yeah, that was
Well,
like 10 questions in one. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, no. And the muddled sounds you hear from me are because at the time we were overwhelmed. Well, it wasn't we, it was me who was overwhelmed because I was the only person who was charged with providing direction to this. We weren't large enough yet to have other people to work with it on us, and I was busy just doing software development. So as these things were happening, like you were asking, did we have market research to say this is what the customers are looking for? No, we didn't have market research to say this is what the customers are looking for because we didn't have a company that could direct itself, that had the talent to do what the customer might be looking for, even if we knew what it was. We didn't have that kind of skill level. Yeah, so we were, and we weren't professional programmers in that regard. We didn't have the backgrounds in graphics. We were pretty primitive in that regard, and that's why, for instance, the next program I did was a word processor, and the next program that Silas did, what did he do after that? He did a program called, what did he do after Castle Wolfenstein? Oh, he did Castle Wolfenstein 2.
Beyond Castle Wolfenstein.
Beyond Castle Wolfenstein. And so, and I did a word processor called Supertext. Now that was the strength of our company right there. That was it. And because we had sales for a period there, and we had money coming in, as an aside, I tried to build a company that could run and grow. But number one, I made just a lot of mistakes, given that although I was scientifically sound in statistics and business and stuff like that, I didn't really know how to manage a business and how to pick the people. So I wound up picking people that were my friends, number one.
Oh, never a good sign for a business.
Yeah, no, that's not a good sign because, and I hired one friend who was, well, it was not good. It's not good. And that caused core problems at the company. And then I tried to offload my direction setting for the company to a friend, let him kind of run, set the management of it, and that didn't work well. So all these things kind of went awry because what I wanted to do was just program, as I still do. So, and my original thing was that I was captured by my success in writing that first program. So where did we go from there? I did get some people in. I had a marketing guy, and I had a guy in charge of the software development team. But the team itself was a ragtag group. And I say ragtag, not that they were not good people, but they were inexperienced people with no formal educations in programming that I had hired because of their enthusiasm for wanting to get into the computer field. And they all later, I'm sure, after they got their experience and started at my company, went on to do great things. They were all, bright people, but we didn't have the formal education in programming that was becoming a requirement across the industry to do big things, some kind of education in programming. The only education I had in programming was my initial 1401 experience. Other than that, I'm self-taught, So while I have great ideas, I've often called myself, the three instruction wonder. That I can do really good stuff with just a couple instructions. So so there the core programming expertise of the company was low. The imagination of a few of the individuals like myself and Silas was quite high, but you can only go so far with that. So anyhow,
Well,
Yeah,
okay. Well, that would bring us over now to Silas because we've talked a lot about now the management of the company and so forth, and you've said it yourself. Silas was basically your partner, if not on paper, but in practice. What was
spirit.
his
Yeah.
training in spirit? What was his training?
Well, he was trained in educational software from a Control Data Corporation working on a system called Pilot. Um uh, that was a distributed network education system, really advanced for the time. And he was a very bright fellow. He might be one of the brightest fellows I've ever known. And also, eccentric wouldn't be the right word because a more positive word, just had really wide interests. Uh, One day, I was walking down Charles Street, which was the main avenue in downtown Baltimore, and I saw Silas coming towards me on the sidewalk a good ways off. And I looked at him closely, and it appeared that something was like sticking up above him. And as I got closer, I saw that he had like one of those huge whip antennas stuck down the back of his sports jacket. And he always wore this huge sports jacket, you know. And in one pocket, he had like a small motorcycle battery or something. And in the other pocket, he had a CB radio.
Oh,
And this
geez.
guy is cruising down the sidewalk talking to people like this, you know. I mean, that's just kind of the guy he was. And
Wow.
another thing that was something is that he could type, he could code, really, this is true, honest truth. He could code faster than I could read it coming up on his screen. I mean, he was just phenomenal. He was just phenomenal. And he also, another odd thing, is that he always had at least two books open, one inside the other. And he was reading one and he was reading the other. And this
Okay.
wasn't a one-time experience. This was like all the time. He was like a multi-processing, brain or something. He was quite a guy. It was really, they used to have those stories, the most unforgettable person. Well,
Yeah.
Silas is it. Silas is it. Yeah. So, and he was a good programmer. He sometimes missed the as good programmers sometimes do. The if I would give him input, it would usually have to do with, well, people can't understand that. You have to do it. You have to make it so a person can understand it. And you say, well, all they have to do is go over here and do this, and then come back here and do this, and then do this and do that. And I would say,
Yeah.
no, Silas, they just need to do one key, and that'd be it. Well, okay, but yeah, but we had lots of fun together. We had lots.
Oh, sounds
So the
like it.
business went on. We went through a couple cycles of in addition to the internal problems we were having and the economy was also going through a recession then.
Yeah.
We had early on some venture capitalists come to the company, and I remember one time I had a conversation with a very nice woman that was a venture capitalist, and this is symptomatic of where I was at the time. And she said, "Well, we can give you money to help grow the company." And really, this is what I said. I said, I don't know what I would do. You know, I don't know what I want to do. I had two desks in my office at the time. I had one desk for the president of the company. On the other side of the office, I had a desk for a programmer. And that's where I wanted to be. And I told her that. I said, I don't know where this is going, but I'm a programmer, and that's what I want to do. So, as time went on, I tried to get different people in different positions. If you can't do something yourself, you want to find the right people to do it. But I could never find the right people for those positions. I knew that it wasn't made to run and plan the company. Um, but I couldn't find the right person too, because there was kind of a shortage of those people at the time.
Yeah.
People that could do that would start their own software companies.
Hmm.
So what are you to do? That's still a question. Could I have been somebody else? Because I still revisit that. Although, I came out okay by the whole thing. When I look at Ken and Roberta Williams and say, "Oh God, yeah, I should have my yacht." Uh, you know, you do what you can in life. Life has its ups and downs, and you get to play the cards you're given.
That's
Yeah.
true.
So where does that take us then?
So
What?
we had the launch of Castle Wolfenstein. We've got Silas working on Beyond Castle Wolfenstein. We've got your word processing software out there, and then pretty much, I'm guessing from the timeline, I have to look up the exact release dates, but you have Beyond Castle Wolfenstein being released in '81, maybe, right before the company goes bust.
Right,
And
right. We
so
had we
how
had a
does that
we
come
had, we made
about?
a couple major decisions that hurt us. But over the time we had the company, we did learn and see lots of channels of distribution develop. First with the distributors that started a year or two into it, and then it got just more traditional, where to get into stores you needed to know job rackers or rack jobbers, whatever they're called,
Hmm.
that fill up the racks and stuff. But yeah, so that's, as an overview, that's kind of the history of the company. And so luckily I was in good shape when that happened. And then I took off from 81 until like 93, and worked on a couple pieces of software at home that were interesting. I came up with a piece of software called Hyperword or something, that was a text-based program that was like hypertext and stuff, but nothing much. I just spent time. I call it my early retirement there. And then in the early '90s, I looked for other stuff to do.
So when the company came to an end, which systems were you developing for?
Apple. It was a Commodore 64. It was the Timex, little tiny Timex.
Yeah.
Uh, and then it was the IBM PC. And so we had products when we went out of business. We had products for all of those. Well, not
Gotcha.
the Timex. We experimented with the Timex, but didn't do anything with it. So yeah, we had Castle Wolfenstein and Supertext on the Apple Commodore 64 and IBM PC.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Well, yeah. But this is extremely, and you're still programming today.
Correct.
You're still at it. As I called you up, and this is your birthday, by the way, so everybody say best wishes to Mr. Zaron here. But you're still programming today because you're still in love with the machine, right?
Oh, I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. And I have other interests and I'm luckily, knock on wood, I'm in perfect health. I'm in perfect health. And uh, one of the things I have to do, though, is I have to limit my time at the computer, because after 70 years of this or whatever it is now, geez, I don't know. After all these years, it's bad to sit so long. So I have to have other hobbies. That's why I have the school bus I'm converting to a camper, and have a farm and stuff like that. You can't stay in front of the computer all the time, unfortunately, or else I might. But you have to get out and do other stuff. Yeah.
And one last question. You made games, you sold games. Did you ever play a lot of games?
You know the answer to that. I'm sure in your heart you know the answer.
Oh, I know it.
That is,
I'm guessing it already, but I gotta ask it anyway.
no, no. I would never play a computer game. I mean, generally no. Generally, no, because computer games, I mean, you're playing with a computer like that. No, it's stupid. Give me a break. There are better things to do with life. Yeah, yeah. And I'm completely puzzled now by the big industry of watching people play computer games. And I talked to my grandson about it, and he challenges me. He says, "Well, tell me how it's different than watching a basketball game or a football game." And I say, "Well, geez, and every point I bring up, he counters it. So I don't know. I don't know, but it's not for me. It's not for me. Nor are all the electronic occurrences on our lives now. It's too much. It's crazy. It's
I hear
crazy.
you.
And call me a Luddite, but no, there's more to do in this world. Go out and really smell the air. Look down a hole or something. Get out the shovel, do something. Well, you're out in the country, I take it, so you understand what I mean.
I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, I got a million hobbies myself, and this is just one of those passions. And I still play. I do play games from time to time. I mean, Muse Software. You do not want to know how many hours I spent on Space Taxi as a kid, as well as the Wolfenstein games. So, and one last thing, since we do have to talk about it. Wolfenstein was obviously an inspiration to programmers like John Romero and John Carmack. Uh,
Sure.
what was your reaction when you found out that they had taken that property and moved the ball with it and
Well,
changed?
I think that's really good. I think that's really good. Um, yeah, yeah, and I've seen I think Castle Wolfenstein 3D or other follow-ups to it. They've taken the name. Well, they bought the name, and the name has been resold, I think, a couple times.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, but it's oh yeah, I'm glad to see them take that. Now, the three-person or the what do you call that person game? Where you see
first
your gun
person.
in front of yourself.
Yeah,
First
first
person,
person
right?
shooter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. First person shooter games. I think they're pretty interesting, but not for me to play. But I
yeah.
still admire the work in them and the graphics too. It's just amazing what teams can do now.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Did they have to approach you, or did you? Was the license already lost during the bankruptcy?
interesting story. This is a story worth telling.
Please.
So, the company was couldn't be salvaged, and having gone through a couple ups and downs uh, prior to the last down, I didn't have the heart for continuing with that. I thought I could do better just to break it off. So I went to my attorney and said, "Look, we want to go Chapter 7 here and just close it up because I owe some money." And I want to be sure those people are paid. So we're going to close it down. We're going to sell the assets and everything. And he said, "Okay, are you sure you want to do that?" I said, "Yes, I'm sure I want to do that." The rights were sold during the auction. Right at the auction in the building, people said, "Well, I'll pay 10,000 for the trademark of that," and so they were
Gotcha.
auctioned. They were auctioned off, and all
Yeah,
that was straight then.
gotcha. After the company and went into receivership, went into bankruptcy, what did Silas do?
Silas went over to work for the fellow who did geez, I can't think of his name now. The guy, he was a military guy. He had the fighter simulation programs. What's the name of that
Microprose.
company?
Oh,
Micropros. Yeah,
Wild Bill
yeah.
Steely.
Staley.
Bill Steely.
Staley,
Yeah,
right. Yeah, he went to work for Wild Bill over in the name of the town was Hunt Valley that he worked in. And he did that for a while, and I'm not sure where he went after that. I've occasionally gone in on the web and found some stuff about him. He later married. He wasn't married at that time, but he later married. And I read a couple postings about him. He was sick and he died from I don't know what it was, a kidney thing maybe or something. Um, he was always healthy when I knew him. He's just a big, healthy, robust guy, great guy. Um, Yeah. So after Bill Staley, I'm not sure where he went. Bill also picked up some of the other programmers that worked for me. Um, yeah, one of the other fellows and as I said earlier, I would hire programmers more because they were so enthusiastic about computers and rather than them having great experience. And I just had some great individuals working for me, and I'm sure they got their starts in computers working for me. One fellow was in packing and shipping and came up every day to talk to me and tell me what thoughts he had about programming and stuff. And then he moved up to programming. Uh, yeah, so I think they all got started on great careers, which was real positive that the company could do, although it didn't serve the company well long term, but I'm sure it's reflected in their lives now. One of the fellows, I wish I could remember his name, he moved to Japan and became a programmer in Japan too. So,
Oh,
who knows
cool.
what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you remember a gent by the name of John Kuchner?
Yeah. Kushner, sure. Sure. I like John. He was a good guy. He drove my Porsche one day. Um, yeah, he did. What did he did? He did a program. He did Space Taxi, didn't he?
Exactly, Space Taxi.
Right, right. And he also did another one about fires or something that we had to stop selling because um, somebody thought it was too violent a thing to be setting fire of a building and trying to get out, which it probably was. Which it probably was. But when we quit selling it, we got a letter from some congressman. What was his name? Congratulating us on our wise choice.
Oh,
Yeah, such
really?
is life.
Your
Yeah.
wise choice to discontinue the game.
So, did you ever have to deal with piracy?
Here's an interesting little one. So back when we had the company, we were selling to local stores. You know how we went through a whole
Yeah.
development chain of different channels of distribution. But early on, I visited the local computer stores.
Yeah.
So I visit a local computer store, and he's got copies of my programs that he copied. And I say, well, you can't do that, because it's copyrighted material. And he goes, yeah, right. What are you going to do? So I went home, and the next day I called the FBI. And so, since there was a federal building in the town of Baltimore, a big federal building there, they sent an FBI agent, a couple FBI agents over to talk to him.
Oh,
And
awesome.
that was just so amazing. I never thought they would do that. But I guess they had to enforce copyright laws.
Of course, yeah.
So he would never talk to me. He would never buy software from me again. But he stopped copying it. So,
Well, there you go. At least that happened. Yeah. Oh
yeah.
my God. Oh, that's a great story. So why did you choose to go with the Apple?
That's a good question. Um, That's a real good question. Not only initially, because initially when we got the Apple, they had the PET computer out too. It was,
Yeah.
I think that was made by Commodore. It had like a
Yeah.
built-in monitor.
Yeah.
I don't know why we went with the Apple, other than I think the price point was better. It was how much was it? It was like $1,500 with 4K. Can you imagine having a 4K memory? That's 4,000. You can't do a hello screen in less than like 2 gigs now.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I don't know. I think the Pet was the only other one out, and we just liked the Apple. I guess you could get a TV and hook it to it to have a bigger screen. It was more portable looking. I used to carry mine around in a big gray suitcase, taking places. It was crazy. Yeah, I remember when I had my first program, a guy called me up and he said, "I'm interested in that software. I'd like to buy your whole company." And I said, "Oh, so so he said, I'll meet you at the Holiday Inn. I'm going to be at the Holiday Inn. You come over there and visit me." So I took my Apple, put it in a gray suitcase, and went over there and set it up for him in his hotel room, and using the TV that was in the hotel room. and I had like 3 games at the time. I think I had Tank War, I had the Music Box, and I had a program called UDraw that where you could draw little vector based drawings. And he said, "Well, I like your company. I'll give you 10,000 for everything." And I said, "Oh, I don't know. That was a lot of money to me at the time because I started the company with $17. I never, that was it. I rolled that $17 around a lot. So I said, no, I think I'll keep going with it. And so then I told my girlfriend about it a day or so later, my girlfriend at the time, and she said, "Oh, you were so foolish. You should have done that. You should have sold it $10,000." So it turned out okay. But my path to the present is like got all these whys in the road. Why you go this way or go this way, and it just amazes me how it changes life. When I had a fellow working in my company by the name of Alan Boyd, a smart young guy, very smart marketing wise, but he wanted to be a programmer. It seemed he wasn't, but so he was very wise in lots of ways. Well, when he was working for me, he went out to Microsoft, and he later got a job at Microsoft, and from what I understand, a relatively high up job at Microsoft. And this is still in the real early days. This is like 79. And after he was working at Microsoft, I met him at a computer fair, which weren't fairs in, they were like held in coliseums. And he said, "Look, Ed, I can get you a good job at Microsoft, get you stock and everything. You'll be getting in early." And I said, "No, I've got my own company." And so, the road to where you are, you have to look at it and look at what you got now, So, yeah, so that's that I always reflect on that. And it's quite a kick. And I had some regular day jobs, you would call them, working as a programmer in different places in the 90s. And in one place I worked, I was talking to my boss, and he said, "Boy, you should have joined Microsoft back then, if you knew what they were doing." I said, "Yeah, I had an offer, but I didn't, So yeah, makes my eyes water. It's so funny. God. Well, good laughs there. I really enjoyed talking to you, Carl. I was
thank you very much.
Apprehensive at first about thinking back about all that stuff, but it turned out well. But again, you always question your, you're usually your harshest critic, but you do your best, and that's you be who you are.
Exactly, and you really did give. This has just been a fountain of information. You have led an extremely interesting life. You were in the industry at a moment of its inception, so to speak. And you did some amazing stuff. And it may have been a short ride, but it was a really good one. And we as gamers really enjoyed it.
Well, that's good. Thank you. I call it the big time money warp that you have to look for.
There's a book in there someplace. So
yeah, it's the fabric of time and money. Some places it gets warped, and that's where it go.
Exactly. So Ed, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing. And I'll just say to all of our listeners, I hope you'll be with us next time.